Do you know, there's nothing like the love of a mom. And I remember a story, I was thinking about it when I, talking to Tim, driving across country the last 2 days and heading off to Colorado. And I remembered a story, it was about a family that was moving. And they had 2 cars. And they had to get both cars across the country. And Mom was going to drive one car and Dad was going to drive the other car. And their little son, their little 4-year-old boy, Nathan, was asking, well, who do I go with? And they said, well, you can go with whoever. And he got really concerned, though, but he said, well, what if we get separated? What if we get separated? How are we going to find each other? And Dad, the wise guy he was, well, I guess we'll never see each other again if we get separated. And the little boy responded, well, I'm going with Mom, then. I think that sometimes compares and talks about a mother's love. Do you know, my text this morning is this passage from John chapter 15, which is really the second part of what we had with the gospel reading last week, where Jesus talks about him being the vine and we are the branches. And what God wants us to do is to bear fruit. In this passage, he picks up in verse 9, and Jesus begins to talk about remaining in the Father's love. And it's just interesting, you're thinking about remaining in the Father, in my love. Jesus says, remain in my love. And you know what you're going to have? My joy. Unending joy. And I began to think about that and work on that the past few days and looking at this text of remaining in the love of Jesus. And sometimes love comes and goes in different places, and sometimes relationships fall apart. That's the hard part about divorce, is because, there was a love and a bond that makes commitment go and promise to be with each other till death do us part, and all of a sudden it breaks apart and it's very dramatic. I saw read an interesting article this week. One of the more interesting articles I've read in a while, and it was by a vet from the Iraq War named Sebastian Youngman. And he's done a lot of work with returning soldiers. And the article was about PTSD, and it's post-traumatic stress disorder. And you may have heard it. Sometimes soldiers get it coming back into the environment. And really, as he studied this a lot and worked with soldiers who have this malady, he found that, sometimes when we think about post-traumatic stress, it happens when people see something terrible. And you know what? War is terrible. And then dealing with that and coming back home, they have issues they haven't resolved. But when he researched, he found it's not so much the traumatic. And the worst thing he said, that people could experience overseas war if one of your best friends got killed. It's even traumatic seeing the enemy killed. You know what he found that was interesting? He said, if you get wounded, that's not as traumatic. Because you know what? A lot of times when you get wounded, you're getting better and you're coming back and doing that. That's not traumatic. But the PTSD, as he talked about it, he found that we have an incredibly high rate of PTSD among soldiers, even higher than the number of people who are in combat. And he said the biggest thing that he found about it was that it has more to do with the environment in which they return than the environment in which they came. He said the soldiers, a lot of times when they're together, they're in their platoon, they are tight. There are people next to them on their side who know will die for them. They feel an incredible bond with those people. The harder part is when they go back home and they don't have that bond anymore. He found that people sleeping in the range of bombs with 10 close friends to feel safer than when they come back to the United States and they're in a house all by themselves with nobody there. what he said was more important was the environment coming back to. And in our society and culture, we live in an environment where people are split up, we're isolated, and we're all alone. In technology and the world in which we live, feel disjointed. Have any of you ever had the feeling, in the United States nowadays, are we politically more cohesive than we were 20 years ago? Actually, I think it's getting worse and worse, right? And that's one of the things that bothers me. You know what? Both parties, they don't want to really honestly talk about the truth and how to make things better. They just want to denigrate the other guy. And coming back into that environment, where it's everybody for themselves. This article said, what the soldiers find, they're coming to an environment that's terrible. It's more the society in which they're coming back to than the war they were leaving behind. And he compared it to Israel. Israel actually fights a lot. Do you know what their rate of PTSD is among their soldiers? Ours is 33%. Do you know what their rate is? 1%. And partially it's because, everybody goes in the army or serves. You either go in, or you're in the army, or you basically scrub toilets in a ghetto for a year. You get the one choice when you're 19. Everybody does that. So you know what? Everybody has the same situation, and you know what? They bond and relate to each other going through it. There's this sense of community and togetherness. And that's what we as people need. Do you know, I was focusing upon these words where Jesus says, remain in my love. And you know what the result of that is? You remain in my love, you obey and listen to what I teach you, and you know what? You're going to have joy. My joy, Jesus says. Unending joy. And that's important. I think that's one of the things that God wants us, and really what the church is all about. The church is a place where we come together and we share this amazing love and grace of Jesus. It's a sacrificial love that, the cross is all about. What? Jesus is not thinking about himself, but he's just thinking about us. And I think that's the big thing we like about moms. Because moms usually, what they do? They think about their kids. They don't think about themselves. I asked my wife what we want to do for Mother's Day today. And I think she was thinking about me. She said, let's go to the Rays game today. So she knows I like baseball, so. But you know what, that's, but when I think about it, that's a compliment, because, when it's her day, she's, she's thinking, well, what would you and the kids want to do? Let's do it. But that's what you think about mothers. And even more when you think about Jesus, who didn't think of himself, but who thought of us. And Jesus says, remain in my love, and you're going to have joy. That's one of the things that you can get only in the church, is joy. Do you know what? There's a lot of things that bring happiness. When I was thinking about, God, I know I've said this in sermons before, God doesn't want you to be happy, but God wants you to be joyful. What's the difference? Happy is what happens when something happens in life. If the Rays win today, I'll be happy. But you know what? They'll probably lose tomorrow. So, it's sort of a roller coaster of emotions. You know what? With the current events, happiness is dictated by, the events of the moment. But joy, the joy of Jesus, is meant to be lasting. It doesn't change from Monday to Friday, from Wednesday to Sunday. It's a sense of knowing who we are. And that's one thing I always want the church to be, and something that's a place of joy. Because we have Jesus. And ultimately, Jesus wants to bring us his love and his eternal state of joy in the midst of this world, in the midst of the brokenness and falling apart and the troubles of this world. Jesus wants us to have the joy that comes only from knowing him and remaining in his gracious love. Do you know the third thing that Jesus, after remain in my love and you're going to get joy, that Jesus talks about here is he calls us friends. Here's a hard question. Can you give me a definition of what's a friend? That's a tough question, isn't it? How would you define a friend? And there's certain things that go in with being a friend. I remember reading an article years back. It was about a newspaper had a column for definition of friends. And there were some definitions that I remember. One was a friend is somebody who multiplies joys, who has sorrows, and shares your griefs. But I think the best one was a friend is somebody, when the whole world goes out and leaves you, comes in. And is there. Do you know, Jesus calls us his friends. And you know, that's one of the more unlikely names for God. And you know what, God the Father. You know, there's a lot of overlap in the names of God the Father and God the Son. But this is one that doesn't overlap. God in the Old Testament never really called us that word friends. He was God. But incredible thing that Jesus does. And you know what, as he walked with Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, and Judas, and all those disciples, you know, he could look them in the eye and say, "You're my friends." Everything that I got from God the Father, I made known to you. Everything that is mine, the kingdom of God, I'm sharing with you. My eternal inheritance from heaven, I'm sharing with you. And you know, that's just what a friend does. There's someone who is there, who shares. In good days and tough days. You know, that's Jesus. Do you know what I think about this passage and what Jesus really ultimately is going? He's trying to get us to bear fruit. And as I worked on this passage overall, I think, you know, of application. God wants us to make a difference. And you know, just going back to that article I read, really the biggest problem that article brought out was, you know, we have a problem in society where people are more and more disjointed. And just thinking about what the church wants us to do is we got to share the love of Jesus in a powerful way. You know, we're in sort of a transition time. Last week we had our goodbye to Tim, and we've started the call committee. What I want is input from everybody. There's a call committees form, and the list is in the bulletin of what we do as we work to replace Tim. But I want us to always grapple with the question, well, what are we doing? But what can we do better? What do we need to do that we're not doing? You know, the problems of the world, they're not going away. The problems of teenagers, they're not going away. How do we share the love of Jesus with young, with old, with mothers, with fathers, with the rich, with the poor, with everyone, so they may know the love of Jesus, his unending joy?